Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. I think they were my hands-on experience initially.
Yeah.
I was very new in the field when I had my oldest daughter, and so only a couple years in, like all of those things that I learned about, I wanted to make sure I did with my kids to make sure that they had the best opportunity to grow and develop into who they were. And it was something that I always valued very much as a new mom is I didn't want to have this prescription for what my kids were supposed to be. I knew they
Mm.
needed to grow and develop, and how I arranged their environment, what I encouraged in their environment, really was a big part of that. And so I think a lot of parents try to kind of hover over the top and micromanage their children from very early on, and I just never did. From exploring what was on the ground to, hey, we're playing outside and you might have put a leaf in your mouth. Well, we might
Yeah.
not do that again, right?
Exactly.
So giving those experiences that were more hands-on, that allowed them to learn whether something was good or something was bad, something they would do differently the next time. I think that raised them to be in this space of like asking questions and being curious about things, and that continued through all of my children.
Is it true though? Like, as a parent, you see yourself in your children. Is that a myth or
100%. So,
really?
and in
Okay.
each one of them, it's a different part of me.
Hmm.
So Riley is that, my youngest Riley, she is the one that came out as like everything that maybe I caused problems and wreaked havoc with everyone. She's that for me. So she's come back to like she's my karma.
Okay.
She came back into being spicy and argumentative and all the things that make me really great today,
Uh
but
huh.
maybe not so much as a teenager. She
Yeah.
possessed all those qualities. So I know that she will be in the same place, one day.
So you look, you're like, man, that was me.
Yep,
That.
yep. It's my words literally coming back to me. And
Okay.
in each one of my kids, I see that, my oldest being that really intentional relationship builder, who wants to please everybody and make everybody happy, and then
Hmm.
my middle daughter who just, she's so much her own individual, but she's very firm in her belief system and she knows what she likes and doesn't like and isn't afraid to say it.
Yeah.
So I look at all of my kids and how they each took something away kind of from me, that's made them, I think, really strong in who they are today.
That's cool. Now, are you a Las Vegas native or are you from
No,
somewhere else? Okay.
I am not.
Hmm.
I grew up in the Midwest. So I graduated college and I moved to Vegas. He he was my fiance at the time. Is like, I'm moving to Vegas. I'm like, sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I was 22 years old and I thought that sounds like a great plan. Let me go. So in 1999, I moved here, just out of school, and I'd not really lived in such a large metropolitan space before, and this was a big population boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there was a lot of people moving here. Um, I learned very early on, like I was not settled in the community. I was very used to having a close, tight knit community, and I didn't necessarily feel that when I first moved to Vegas. And so I always tried to create it wherever I was,
Right.
create what I missed, and no matter what professional experience I had, I still tried to reach out and do things in my community, even if it was a small thing that was just me involved in it. Just something that I could do to, I was always community minded.
Yeah.
And it was important for me to continue that.
That's cool. I mean, you grew up in Illinois, so you went to K through 12 there. How was that? Like starting in elementary school up until like high school. What was
Um,
your experience as a student and as just a child?
it was very different. I think it's very different than what is today. I learned a lot, but I remember playing in kindergarten. I also remember really strict rules.
Yeah.
I went to public school, and so even in public school, there were strict rules, and you didn't want to try to violate those,
Nope.
because you were afraid to.
Yeah.
And whether that kept you in line from compliance or it kept you in line because you didn't want to get in trouble and disappoint other people, we still had those rules in place. And then, I think I had a good education. I think it was well rounded. It was a balance of doing things through play and then also doing things that I think you got to develop what your passion was. There was more encouragement for that. But I also had some really bad experiences.
Yeah.
You know, I remember very early on being traumatized with math, and I use the word trauma not like this colloquial term, but like I still remember it to this day, and I remember the feelings I had from it. So it left a really big mark on who I became, and as I decided to be an educator, the type of educator I wanted to be. I didn't want children to feel the way I did about math, which is that I could never do it.
So what was your favorite subject if it wasn't math?
It was English. So
Okay.
I loved reading. I think I would get lost in books. I would read a book and finish it in 3 days, and my grandfather would go run to the mall and buy me a new book. And, there was no Amazon then. So
Yeah.
we had to take a little drive, and he would get me another one. And then the new book would come out, and I would want to get that one. And so I was just a voracious reader, which made me a better writer too. But those were always my favorite subjects.
Right.
Anything though I could do hands-on too. So we had home ec. I learned to sew and to cook, and learned that I really loved to cook by having those experiences too.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned how your grandparents that they were very much like community servants in a way. Like they were giving back a lot and they were a part of like, volunteering opportunities. Do you feel like you how can I put it, like got a lot of those characteristics from them as far as you giving back to your community?
For sure. I think
Okay.
that's where I watched it happen. And it was it seeped up through the roots. It wasn't something that was this expectation. It was just like, hey, it's Monday night. We take the people from the nursing home out to dinner. Like it was just like this thing that we did. And no matter how much older I got, sometimes I would get frustrated because I had my own social life I wanted to, be a part of. But I still remembered like, hey, this was the commitment. And it was just who they were. So it was who I was. Every day my grandpa was taking this person or this person to a doctor's appointment and just volunteering his time. He never asked for money or asked to be paid, and focusing on people that couldn't drive anymore, whether they were elderly or disabled, and just learning that through them. Watching that, it just became such an active part of who I was. I think it inspired me to want to do the same thing. I didn't see age as being like something that could stop me or would stop me. If I dreamt it, I just tried to do it. And it was nice because even if they didn't always support what I was doing, they supported the fact that I was driven by a mission and I was called to like serve my community. And I think they still supported that, which was important to me because it showed me like no matter about the differing opinions that people can have, you can still support one another for doing good things in their community.
Exactly. And that led up to you being like basically a sexual health educator. Like,
Yeah,
would you mind sharing that?
sure. I mean, it
'Cause
was
from a young age doing that.
yeah,
I never heard it. Like you rarely meet people at that age doing things like that.
right,
So
right.
especially nowadays. So like, could you
Absolutely.
share that experience?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, there was an opportunity. I think it was like an announcement at my high school where we talked about there was a peer educator position where you could go out and you could teach the community about HIV/AIDS prevention. Well, at that period of time, it's in the mid 90s. And so there was a lot of unknowns too still, but we still knew quite a bit about, how HIV and AIDS were contracted. And then what happened was there was a lot of negativity surrounding it because of sensitive population. And so that stigma kind of stayed with people. And I felt that was really unfair that they be judged. And so I made it my mission to become this peer educator through the American Red Cross. And we would go out and we would talk to other teenagers in a number of experiences and talk to them about HIV/AIDS prevention, which also led to like, at that time it was STDs, sexual transmitted disease prevention, all the things that were happening in the community, but nobody ever talked about. But like if you were a teenager, you knew what was happening. And so that really started my own like personal missions that I wanted to see things happen and things change. And also looking at communities that faced adversity, I really found it like made my heart race when I felt that they were being treated unfairly. And so
Mm.
that also started my like call to action. So what can we create to change things for people that face a lot of adversity? And so that was just one of the things in my life that kind of charged me forward, and I kept moving forward from that.
Yeah, what did you take from, like you probably like seen so much like during that time of your life. So
Hmm.
what did you take away? Like what are the like just tell us like maybe 3 big takeaways from that. Like just teaching people sexual health and then
Hmm.
to, what could be the cause of it,
Hmm.
what they don't know about it, because
Hmm.
now you're not going to get that kind of education anywhere, especially in the schools.
Right.
I don't even think they're teaching it really. So
Mm-mm.
what do you
I
have to
think
say?
I think the biggest piece is that always initiate the conversation, even if it's with a small audience, because you will impact somebody.
Hmm.
And so you will answer questions that that one person didn't know. And so even if it's just one person, that's one person that didn't know. And I have that whole philosophy, like if you teach a man to fish. So if I like share this
Yeah.
information with one person, more than likely they're going to share it with another person who's going to share it with another person. So even if it's just that one thing I can do to kind of impact change on one person, or even if my audience is only 3 people, that was 3 people that I didn't talk to yesterday. So
Very
I
true.
think
Yeah.
it made that mission for me that no matter how large or small an audience was, to still take advantage of like telling the story or telling the learning opportunity or something, to still do that.
Okay.
Don't shy away from being the, being a quiet place or a quiet room. Still have those conversations. It also taught me how to have hard conversations. When you're a teenager and you're talking about things like that, there's a lot of laughing and stuff. And
Exactly.
so I had to learn very early on how to be good at public speaking and how to manage the audience, because there was a lot of like, we wanted it to be a safe place for teenagers to talk and ask really open ended questions without being shot down. And so I think I had to learn how to manage an audience, and I'm 14 years old, doing this. It was a
Hmm.
very interesting thing. How did I get better at it? Well, it was trial and error. I failed a few times, and then I did really well a few times. I had to get feedback from people that were older than me saying, like, this was good or this wasn't good. I did come to learn that, like in that time, anecdotal stories were what had the most inspiration for kids my age.
Okay.
And so I think I took that away from that opportunity as well.
Now, with the adults, like, did you have some adults that are like, I'm not gonna listen to you, like, because
Oh, for sure.
try to intimidate you, because at that age, being able to get in front of people, that's very hard. Because I remember at that age, I didn't want to do any kind of public speaking engagement. So, how
Hmm.
was that like having to stand and present yourself to adults and children, who probably don't even take the subject and you serious,
Right. I think it was hard at first, but
Yeah.
I had to learn that I had to turn that fear into and like motivation. So kind of like that accelerated heart rate, you get really sweaty before you're
Yeah.
nervous. Like I had to turn that into motivation
Okay.
and just start to have a conversation. And once I did that, people would say and make the comment like, "Wow, how old are you?" Like I wasn't even able to drive, and I was going to different places to have these talks and discussions. And so it was, people didn't understand that I was as young as I actually was. And I really felt that, I thought maybe it was being kind of raised by older people. Like I felt like I was an equal playing ground, playing field with people.
Yeah.
I didn't look that age was an indicator of like less knowledge. I thought everybody had a story and everybody had something to share. So um, I was definitely nervous, the first few times I did it especially.
Yeah.
But that feeds you too, You also learn that not everybody's out there to cackle or laugh at you in an audience, and
Hmm.
really people want you generally to do a good job. And so taking the feedback and listening to what people had to say to me, like what I did well, what I did not do well,
Yeah.
it really helped me, I think.
So how was college life for you?
It was I graduated high school early. I graduated just a semester early because I was kind of done with high school. I just wanted to get into life.
Yeah, you was like, I'm ready to get out the house.
Yes, and that's how I felt.
Yeah.
So, I graduated early, and then I went to community college that first year because I wasn't even 18 yet. And then I transferred to a 4-year university, and that for me, like I knew exactly what I wanted to do at that point. I knew I was going to be a teacher. I wanted to work with mainly younger children, and I knew kind of the trajectory that I had. I never would have guessed early on that I would have come to live in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed life would have brought me here. But I knew what I wanted. And so I balanced, having a social life. I was in a sorority, but years ago, it wasn't kind of like what it shows on TV now. Life wasn't like that. We were very community service minded. Individuals. Some of my best friends to this day were people that I met during that time. And so, and still to this day, almost 30 years later, we're still friends. And so I look at that time and opportunity as it was such a positive thing for me. I didn't face a lot of negativity in college. I felt like it was my first experience with life outside, even though it was still a small town that I moved to, it was still life outside of that, where I truly was 100% responsible for myself, but also staying motivated because I was learning about all the things that inspired me. And it made me want to grow as a professional and have different opportunities. I learned to be really self-sufficient and to go after the things that I wanted. So there was a job I wanted, and I went after it with all of the customer service I had learned in the
Right.
previous 10 years probably of my life.
Did you do sales? Because you seem like you've done sales before.
I actually did not.
Okay.
I've always worked in some capacity with children. So at the time I was in college, I guess I did do sales a little bit. I'd go home on the weekends and I worked in a little store because I still had this really creative side too. So like interior design was something that I really actually loved. And I was really inspired by this woman I worked with and like making a space look homey and like very welcoming. And so I did do that. So I guess I did do a little sales stint, but most of what I did it was working with children or families within the school district. And so I had taught or I helped to arrange parenting classes for families, low-income families. And, that was just my college experience. And then everything pretty much had to do with children, though.
So you came to Las Vegas, and what was your education career in Las Vegas? Like, how was that?
So when I first came here, I started off in a public school.
Okay.
It was the first year that they had made kindergarten kind of, you have to bring your child to school in kindergarten. If you have a kindergarten age child, you're going to start going to school. And so that year they faced an influx of 5-year-olds, and I was in kindergarten. And I'll never forget, I had, I think it was 38 children in the morning class and 36 in the afternoon class, and I had to do that twice. And having children still running out after their family from the back door of the school, which thank goodness there was a gate. But most of my children spoke Spanish. They didn't. English was not their first language, and it was their first time in an experience outside their home. So the communication was really hard, and it wasn't their fault. They only knew as much as they knew. And so what I had to learn that first year is that whatever I was supposed to teach was never going to happen. We just had to build a relationship together, and we had to be able to communicate with one another. I had a little bit of Spanish in my background, but not enough to speak fluently, but I could certainly understand everything they were telling me. So we would come up with our own communication in order for us to be able to talk back and forth to one another. They learned and picked up English very quickly, but it was just not fair to them. And I'm the kind of person that if I can't make a difference, it really weighs on my soul. So that was...
Because it was out of your control. It was like, I'm trying my best, but...
Absolutely.
It's only so much I could do.
And I wish I knew then what I know now, But then I took it home with me, and I was sad all of the time. I cried every day going home because I just couldn't make the impact like I thought I should be able to. And so I ended up leaving after 6 months. And I actually took a little bit of a detour through something that gave me a lot of great experience, which was corporate childcare.
Okay.
So I managed the corporate childcare center for McCarran Airport. At that time, it was called McCarran Airport, and then for Citibank. And I did that for about 5 years, and I learned a lot in that period of time.
Yeah.
I moved up, from just being a teacher in a classroom to the assistant director, and then I took over as the director. And then I became the director at another facility that was facing a lot of challenges. And I was always up for a challenge. So I was like, yeah, bring it on.
I'll do it.
And so I learned pretty fast that some challenges are going to take you down. But that was a tough one because, I took over this building where I had to learn how to fire somebody for the first time. And that's not a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
We had toxic mold and had to close down the facility and move everybody to a different facility, which had I known that was going to prepare me for 20 years later, what I was going to have to also experience with my own school.
Yeah.
So I think that all of that taught me a lot about administrative things, and trying to help people sometimes is closing a door for them so they can find another one to open. That's what I had to tell myself to get by in those moments where it was hard to let somebody go. I still remember every person that I had to fire. I remember their name and their story, and
Yeah.
and
It's sad to say, but
it is.
But you learned a lot from it.
Absolutely.
And that's part of being a leader, and that brings me to asking about where you are now with the school you have. Like, what was that like building that? Because I know it was, people look at the positives, they look at the aftermath, and it looks pretty and stuff, but feel free to share like any tribulations that probably came.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot. And at the time, there's a roadmap, but you don't have a car to go down the map. So you got to kind of figure out what kind of car you need as you're going through different terrain. And so that's what I realized very early on. I knew I was leaving education. After childcare, I went into private school, and I was a teacher in a private school for a long time. And I learned through that experience that I didn't want to it wasn't just me anymore. It was an education system that I could never get away from unless I did something different dramatically. Even though people said I had autonomy to do what I do, I really didn't. I had to justify everything. So I needed to do something different that I was responsible for, that nobody else could tell me yes or no. And so that started this process. And in 2020, we went down the road. I was looking for an educational model, and I found Acton, reading a book by Clark Aldrich, which is called Unschooling Rules. And that was the book where I found the philosophy as if it was inside my own head. It was everything that I believed in, everything I felt children needed in education, everything that was missing. And so I started the process of applying for an Acton, and I found it. Yeah. And so I was granted, I think it was about 9 months later, I was granted our approval. And so we decided, and that was in February, and then we decided we were going to launch in August. And then 1 month later, COVID came, and initially I thought we were going to be derailed. It was actually, for us, the best thing that could have happened, because it was the first time parents had a front row into education in their child's classroom. Whereas, yes, it's true, teachers were doing the best that they could. I think there was what parents didn't realize was happening in classrooms was really happening. And so for us, it was our biggest helper during that time, because parents started to look for something a little bit different. that meant their child just wasn't a name on a piece of paper, but their child was an actual human being.
Yeah. I
And
feel like COVID did kind of open eyes on a few situations that was going on in school, like you stated, but also it showed the systematic part of, the education system, because people started reading more. They started sitting at home, deep searching, why is this happening the way it is? So, I mean, did you find yourself, taking leverage on that and educating more parents on, like, the history of education and why they set it up the way it is today?
absolutely.
Okay.
I think for the first time we had a captive audience. All the times I said it before, people were like, well, it sounds good, but, I found people weren't saying that anymore because they were already asking the question. And so the more I would talk to people about why our education system is the way that it is, the more they started to, it made sense to them. It made sense why their child who normally loves something stopped loving it. It made sense while their child who used to play and have a great imagination no longer did. And so for we absolutely leveraged that opportunity to have discussions with families about what education was like, and that it was not going to shift or change anytime soon.
Yeah.
So, and here we are several years out from that, and we found that it's clamped down only more within a traditional educational sense. Yet our children are failing in reading. 30% of kids can read. Like, that's a travesty, because what happens is children actually will naturally learn to read. If you take kids and drop them off in the forest with boxes of books, they will actually learn to read on their own.
Exactly.
And so if we're not allowing children to read, there's something bigger in play here.
And Acton is fighting against that.
I think it's that kind of the apathy that plagues, and that's part of, like, my mission is, like, the apathy that plagues traditional school. Like, we're not going to see that here. We're going to enrich a love of learning, a love of reading deep books, a love of having conversations about what we're reading. We're going to enrich that. That's going to be a part of everything we do. That's why there's books all over our environment, because
It is.
grab a book, pick it up, read the back, and see if this is something that inspires you. We have all kinds of literature and reading. We can take those learners that are really hate reading. They learn to hate reading because it wasn't for enjoyment. It was to produce something for a teacher to look at it and give them a grade on whether they did a good job reading it.
And add to her resume on, I got this many people passing a certain test. And
yes.
that doesn't matter. It's
No.
about the child at the end of the day. And that's what I've seen in Acton, just observing it. I mean, from the start, it was, I remember it was like the first week of school, and I thought Riley was an actual teacher at the school. I was like, oh, she looks very, very young, to be a educator, because the way she was leading the class, and I don't know what the discussion was, but then after a while, someone told me, oh no, that's Amy's daughter. And at the time, I didn't know who you were really and everything. And things started to add up. I'm like, wow. And then just hearing the conversations that they have, and it's not like they're elementary, middle school, like they're having adult-like conversations, but in a mature way, not inappropriately or anything. I mean, that comes with middle schoolers.
Absolutely,
and
it does.
But the depth of it and how they can elaborate on why they made this decision, you really don't see that in school. So how did you gather a community of parents to bring these kind of children to your institute? Because they're one of a kind in my opinion. So
they really are. And it's not just because we have ownership over them, because they're not our children, but they are. And it's like every time, I think early on, the people that believed in us or what we were doing are the people that knew us for a long time. So they took a risk and they took a chance. And so really it was our reputation and what people knew about myself and Miss Kim, and Miss Debbie, like what they knew about us, like, hey, we want our kids to have that opportunity with these really great educators, sometimes not even always understanding what Acton truly was. I say we're not just a noun, we're actually a verb. We're an action. We're not just like, if I act in you, I'm going to do something that's like really indicative of like our philosophy in general. And so I think it took parents to have that trust in who we were. Our biggest, I would say, our biggest advocate really was word of mouth. So what could we do with the child? And that started to travel. And then more people started to look for something different. And then, oh, have you heard of Acton Academy? Have you heard of Acton Academy? And so that was how a lot of people were finding their way to our door. And then, we would have sometimes hard kids that could not survive in traditional education that found their way with us. And I think the parents that I look at today, how I market and how I marketed 5 years ago are completely different. I don't look at the child very much anymore. I actually look at the family. And I might talk and interview the family a little bit more than I would even the child, because
that's where you're going to get the juices. That I just
it
feel
is.
like that.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's where is a parent going to trust the process, because it doesn't work for every parent. I believe it can work for every child, because I think how we are in education and what we do is on a developmental level.
Right.
But I think the parents, it's very difficult to trust the process. And so, the thief of joy is comparison. There's the phrase that's what steals your joy. And I look at how that is really present in families today, as we compare our children from one to the other within our own family, but then outside within our social structure too, we're comparing our kids. So if we feel our child is not where somebody else is and they have the same age child, something's wrong. And I think that's how society has made it seem like something's wrong with the child that's might be different than this child over here.
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Now, what would you say to the parents or even people who necessarily don't even have children? What would you want them to know if they're doubting Acton? Because I know it's more like independent style. You take a very unorthodox pathway on education. So what would you say to people who doubt Acton, since it's not your traditional math, English, history, go to this class, come here at 6:00 a.m., leave at 3:00, go to clubs, and then start all over? What do you have to say to them?
To those parents, I usually tell the story of my own experience with my own children, and my own experience with Riley. I had to trust the process with her, and even owning the school, sometimes I doubted it. Some days I doubt it today, I'll see Riley just being a teenager and I'll doubt, and I say, no, this is her journey. And I have to remind myself, I actually have them go back to maybe exploring a little bit about Joseph Campbell and learning about the hero's journey. It's in a lot of the movies we watch, and it's in a lot of TV shows we watch, a lot of books we read to our children. But do we emulate the hero's journey outside of literature or, fictional movies? No, but it truly is one of those things. And so bringing parents back to read what is the hero's journey. You're on it yourself in your life. Allow your child to be on it, and they will eventually find that calling for them, and what they're meant to do, because they will have enough experience and creative time to innovate, time to fail, to figure out who they are and what they do want to do in that next phase. And so I tell them to trust the process, and the only way that they can trust the process is if they look at how the process works, and then referring them back to that hero's journey. Read some of his work, look at some of our greatest philosophers throughout time that have asked really great questions. It stands true to our children, and I think for that next generation, I always ask, do you want someone that's just going to march in a line with everybody, or do you want somebody that's really going to challenge and push?
But that's what the system wants. Not to cut you off, they want it. That's what it was built for, to march in line, not to have your own imagination.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And so parents don't want that. Like, I don't want my child to just follow directions. I don't want my child to just take direction and wait for direction. That's what I see in kids actually today. New learners that we have come, they wait for direction. And
Right.
that shows me how wrong the system is outside of our children, is that that impacts workforce development. It impacts everything in our future if we just have children that wait to be told what to do.
Now, but you have adults that feel like, well, a child needs to stay in their place. They don't need to have a voice. You know, we give you food, shelter, and clothing. So why do you need to have autonomy? Why do you need to stand up for yourself? You need to follow direction. Like, what's your take on that kind of mindset?
I think that I remind them, depending what age they are, I remind them of how we grew up as children. We actually learned autonomy because we didn't have somebody that could check in on us every 2 minutes. You know, there was no one that knew my location other than the words I left when I walked out the door. I'm going here. And that's what it was. Okay, you have to be home by this time, and you were home by that time, or you faced the consequence to not being home at that time. So there is something to be said about this like safety bubble that I think parents have kind of wrapped around their children to keep them safe. I remind them that as children, you know, what were some of the things that we were doing? Like, we were ripping a refrigerator door off so we could go like sliding down a hill. You know,
Yeah.
I think of, you know, doing donuts in the middle of winter time and getting my car stuck and then getting in really big trouble. You know, I think of all of the things that we did, and children innately need to take risk to weigh the consequence to risk. And when we inhibit it, they take bigger risks as they're older that has a bigger consequence. And so I just like to remind, you know, families of how we were, that we were allowed to develop autonomy and problem solving, critical thinking, because we were just free with nature. You know, we were out playing and doing a lot of things outside of our house or even in our house, but it was not supervised or controlled. And so taking off those kind of barriers and allowing them to still have and take risk,
Right.
and allowing and celebrating failure, I think, and me as a parent too, parenting alongside of all these other parents as well, is like their failure is not ours to own. It's if their failure is a choice that they made and they learn from it, that should kind of be celebrated a little bit and maybe encouraged a little bit. We can't, if we protect them from the failure, we have this fragility that's occurring in children where they then can't handle a hard thing coming their way.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's such a disservice then to our children.
One thing that I feel like is overlooked, especially with a school like yours, is the neurodivergent community. So that is, for people who don't know, it's like those who are autistic or considered special needs. So it like, why I'm bringing this up, because there's a book that that I read, and it's from Tyler McNamara, Population One. I don't know if you ever had a chance to check it out, but he's a young man at this point that is telling his experience, his childhood experience dealing, being an autistic, you know, male. So one of the things that I liked about his book, from chapter 1 to chapter 50, and I know that sounds crazy, it's 50 chapters, but it's actually a good read because he gives you a view, like a solid viewpoint on what it is to be an autistic child, especially in the education system. Like, one of the big things he talked about was his identity, and how a lot of the therapy, a lot of the professionals who looked over him while his parents weren't there, so while he was at school or different programs, they kind of babied him. Like, they talked to him in a way that he wanted to be just like everyone else. He wanted to speak like everyone else, be treated like it, but he sensed that along the way, he was ostracized from, you know, a certain group of kids. You know, they were in these classes, he was in this class, and they were kind of babying him, talking to him like he was I think he mentioned like he was nothing in society, and he always wanted better for himself. And at your school, you're very open to that community. You let them do their thing. You even have an ABA therapy company yourself, you know, and that takes an unorthodox route, especially against, you know, the ABA world. So I mentioned this book because it just reminds me of a lot of the children that I see in the ABA field, and not even just ABA, just in the world, because I've had people along the way growing up that was autistic, but I never understood it. So anyone out there, especially you, if you never had a chance to check out that book, it really shows you how to put your feet in someone else's shoes. Like, even though you may not be able to experience it just like how they did, it gives you that feeling of just being left out. So it brings me back to Acton. How are you able to have that community thrive in your environment?
Well, I think very early on, when I was looking for an educational approach for all, I was really looking for something that any child could do. And, you know, within the realm of like what we can make possible, you know, there are certain things that we just can't do because I'm not a medical professional. We don't have a nurse on site. Like, there's just certain things that that sometimes would be really hard to bring together, because we have limited resources as a small school. But looking at the neurodivergent population, if that's a child with autism or ADHD or dyslexia, is that every child, to me, in my eyes, has a purpose, and they're here for a reason to fulfill something. So when we limit them, and I use this term a lot, of like just learning how to roll silverware, we're limiting the potential that they were truly put on this earth to deliver. And so I knew I did not want a workforce development for our kids where they're just learning to do something so monotonous that their life's purpose wasn't filled. So how did that come into play? We're very open-ended environment. So we're very independently led. So you can be where you're at as long as you're showing progress. High five, that's good for me. So this fit that neurodivergent population. I did learn early on with one of my kiddos, even before I opened Acton. You know, I was tutoring him a few days a week, and he really made me see a lot of things that I hadn't thought about in education. So I knew when I brought it to the table, I really needed to make sure that he was sitting at it too. And so that's where I adopted early on that philosophy. And you know, from some of our youngest learners, learning how to be around a child with autism, because in so many schools, they're kept in a separate room. They're usually at the back of a school. They're not intermixed or being present with other learners, typical, or they're pushed in for specials, not for core skills. What I find of children with autism is they are exceptionally brilliant, and usually it's in a hyper-focused area or way. We need to capitalize on that and let them allow that to help them fulfill their purpose and their passion. Let them find what that is. Let them still be inspired, because they still can be. They're children first. You know, whatever they might have that's secondary to that, we look at that, and it's an individual basis. And our school is individually based. And so they felt very good about fitting into that. But also typical children that may not have experience with children with autism or children with Down syndrome. They are just children. They want to be treated just the same. So if I'm getting on you about X, Y, and Z, I'm also going to get on you if you're a child with autism about X, Y, and Z. You're going to see me treat your peer the same way that I'm going to treat you. And so that's dignity to me. And that's keeping their dignity in place. So I think that's something that through some of the classical ABA therapy and stuff that has gone on for so many years, sometimes dignity is not at the head of that. And that was the first thing that I wanted to bring as kind of redeveloping this philosophy of behavioral therapy. We can still do it so it's humanely based, and so that it's still positive and encouraging and logical. Children face logical consequences every day. Our children in behavioral therapy, it's still logical choices, and you're going to face the same logical consequence, and those can be positive and negative. And so doing that in an environment placed, I saw our young children very early on almost kind of becoming like mini RBTs, where they would talk to the other learners and use the same language.
Yeah.
And it was a time for them to like come together on equal playing ground for the first time. I saw that happen, and it wasn't something we had to encourage. We didn't have to contrive the situation. It was really like, you can just talk to them like they're just like you. Just tell them what you want.
Absolutely.
And so that opened the opportunity to then teach other children that they're still that human, that child first. They want to come play with you. They want to go do these things with you. They want to be included. So make sure you ask, like, hey, come on, it's time for this, or come on, it's time for this.
So your environment, not to cut you off, not force, but it kind of encourages them to look out for, like, other students. They may not act like you or look like you and all this other stuff, but it kind of encourages them to, when they get in the real world, they know how to support, not only support, but to protect those that is a part of that community.
Absolutely.
Because at regular schools, I just remember growing up, like you said, it was just separate classrooms, and often they kind of made fun of those classes. Like, let's just be real for a second. Like, it was like, oh, you're going into the small bus class and all this other stuff. And growing up, there weren't many adults that really sat down the way that you do and explained the differences. Because it's, yes, psychologically there may be a difference, but when it comes to reality, they're a student just like you. They're 13 just like you. They have the same kind of emotions. They may not show it the same way, but it's still the same person. You can be friends with them too. You don't have to just leave them out. So was that always your plan, with Acton, to have that kind of environment?
It was. Like, I knew early on I wanted to. I didn't know how it was going to happen. I just kind of let it naturally happen. Okay. And then I followed its lead into what is today, seeing some things we want to definitely change. The more children we've had, we have about 25% of our population are neurodiverse. So as that population, when we have new learners coming in, it's like retraining that team to understand, like, hey, what does it mean to develop agency, not compliance?
Yeah.
It's the same philosophy I have for those that are typically developing agency, not compliance. And it's the same for our children with autism too. So I knew early on, I didn't know what it would look like or how it would be or how much of it would be a part of our fabric, but it truly is now. The joy that I get, the joy that other learners get, even watching, the success. I watch, from one girl who's learning to use the bathroom on her own, and everybody celebrates that. All of her friends do. She rings the bell because that's a big accomplishment for her. To our girl with Down syndrome, leading the pack and being the den mother of maybe kids making not great choices. So to watch that happen and happen so naturally is really a beautiful thing. And we step back sometimes and we sometimes we'll be like, oh, what's going to happen? But it's the real world, and they figure it out. We just have to have kind of that radical trust in that.
I mean, I can see it with the middle and high schoolers. It's just amazing how they're able to integrate with one another, because you do have some who need people like assisting them, or they need therapists by their side for the school day, and you normally don't see that. And I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's just, I come from a traditional school background too. So even though I went to Magnet at a certain point, it was still traditional. It was very much go to class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then everyone was very much segregated in schools, which is not talked about a lot, depending on the schools that you go to. So it's kind of cool that you're kind of giving them the real world without you even knowing. Maybe you notice it. I'm not sure.
I do. Yeah, I see it.
But they're going to come back and thank you for that, a lot of the students, because I can tell even when I try to catch you and you're busy, they just come up to you and ask you so many questions. And an immature adult would think that this child is asking a dumb question. But when I hear the questions, I'm like, okay, like I didn't even think of that. Like I can learn from this child,
Absolutely.
So it's like, how did you become that educator that's just open to everyone? And, have you gotten parents that kind of lean back and they're like, they don't like your approach,
Oh, yeah.
with their children? Have you had parents that's like, I'm taking my child out, you're not doing this.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they see the smiles, they see the meetings, but feel free to share that.
So that's the tough road. That's where the paths sometimes diverge. So to trust the process, you have to trust the process, not the product. So it often looks very, very messy, and there's a lot of time that it's not going to look great, but know that greatness lies on the other side of that valley. And so, letting parents know this probably isn't going to happen in 6 months or a year, sometimes not even 2 years. Sometimes it might take 3 years for your child really to come full circle into who they are and who they're meant to be. And so there's not a lot of parents that trust that kind of time because they feel like it's being wasted and that they're somehow losing out on something. Not understanding that they're growing this really strong, independent child, which can tackle anything, So not all parents are ready to relinquish that kind of control. And so they do. They'll leave after 6 months or a year and say this just wasn't the place for us, and maybe it's not. Most times, it's not the place for the family. I truly believe every child. This is how it was meant to be for every child. It's couple hundred years of research has gone into developing Acton's philosophy, and so it's not a fly-by-night idea. This is something that is truly in children from the time that they are on this earth. And so for that environment to grow, I think it's been a lot of the balance of learners we bring in. I never know. I never know year after year how things are going to work out because you have a really diverse, complex group of individuals that you put together in a community when they've never been allowed to experience community before.
No.
So they're learning the nuance of community norms, community governance, people you don't like. You don't get to run away from them. They're still going to be here.
Yes, I noticed that. I noticed that and it gives you how it is in a real world when you're in a workplace or even at the grocery store. You may not like a certain person because they're talking loud, they're doing this, and they're able to learn how to regulate those emotions at a young age in your environment. So what's the process of getting your child into Acton?
So usually it's just people reach out, they inquire on our website, they schedule a tour, or they schedule for just more information, and then I personally reach out to them via email. We usually set that up first because I like to know now the way that I explore families is I like to know a little bit more about the family before I bring you in for a tour. And especially now because I have a lot of the learners doing the tours. Sometimes I'm not even present for it. So those adults have to be prepared. We've had people just leave on our learners and just walk out mid-tour because it was a child leading it. Which obviously you're not meant for us if that's the case. But our learners that do tour are very strong leaders, and they're strong in what they're delivering to these families.
They are.
So I'm very confident in their ability. So that's the first thing, to reach out. I'll schedule a phone call or we'll go back and forth in email. And then, if you're ready to kind of explore the next step, they reach out to schedule a tour. And, you never know what's going to happen on any day. It's a really dynamic space. And so one day everything could be humming along, and then it could be a Thursday and it's Lord of the Flies. And I've got like 3 tours back to back. And I'm like, sorry about this. But it's just the way that the space is. It's the way the environment is because they're leading and running so much of their day and with each other too, that I do like families seeing that because from chaos comes order, but there's also chaos that comes after order too. So it's again, that circular pattern is pretty consistent with all of our themes here.
I mean, I heard one of the students, one of your learners, like give a tour, because you usually have adults do it. So if I was in those shoes and I was getting prepared for my child to go to a school and I saw that, I would be very like, I'm like, okay, I would check this school out more, just because you don't see that at a young age. And the way he presented himself and how he explained each grade level and what you guys do in the philosophy of the school, I was just like, a job well done. Like, I know his parents are very proud of him. So you have
For sure.
something going on for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I want our learners to go out into the world and just even if it's one thing they do that thing, and people say like, wow, that's really sets you apart.
Yeah.
And that's what I see when parents have trusted the process long enough to let that transformation happen. Is I see that one thing, that wow factor that comes out in that child. And not everybody's the same. Every wow factor is different for each child.
So back to, the neurodivergent community, I know towards the end of the year that there was like there's been some talks with insurance companies and different, programs getting cut as far as them getting the services that they need. And it's not only just them, it's just worldwide with even healthy adults, healthy children that have different kind of complications that they're experiencing, or even people who just need checkups. They're not getting the proper services and coverage that they need because of greed. And we're going to go further into this. So I know at your school, you're very close to that part of the insurance world and all that. So would you mind going into that? Because I remember you recently made a statement in a local article about this situation. What would you have to say on that?
So hearing the rumblings back in December, I remember telling myself, this can't happen. Like, this cannot happen. How is that legal? Sure enough, it was January 2nd, and I'm hearing that some of our learners have lost their behavioral therapy support because it was occurring during a typical school day. So, what I thought couldn't happen, it did. And it's impacted, probably in excess of over 1,200 children in Southern Nevada that we know of right now. I know that there's more children out there that we don't know that this has impacted. As of January 1st, a lot of insurances changed, and even some of them changed even though they're not supposed to legally change because policies didn't change.
Exactly.
Yet they still made this carte blanche decision to change what children were allowed to receive and what time of day they were allowed to receive it in. And so that wasn't right. And so from very early on in my life, down from my toes, I get very, very upset because it's not right.
Yeah.
And I look at who's making these decisions. Well, it's not at a local level. It's not really even at a state level. State should have oversight over it, but it's at this insurance level, which insurances are beasts. They're huge. Yeah. They are money-making operations. I'm pretty sure they're here solely to make money, not to make people well. Yeah. And so when an insurance company can say to a family of a child, your child cannot get therapy between 8 and 2 every day because that's when most children would be in school. I started thinking, but a child can go to the dentist, or a child can go to the orthodontist, or a child can go to speech therapy or physical therapy during the day.
Wow.
And they can still have a covered benefit. Why are you limiting them on a medically necessary therapy for behavior? And so when it really is that gold standard of care for children with autism. And, ABA has come really far in the field of kind of working in real life, I think. There is a transition in it, but it still is that behavioral focused intervention that children with autism do really need to be successful. And so when an insurance company is dictating what time of day a child can get that therapy,
Yeah.
I started to say, like, this isn't right. We have to do something. And the more that I started to actually talk about it, the more that I heard, oh, this is really bad. Now this is what they're doing in this with this insurance, and this is what they're doing with this insurance. And I'm like, my mind is blown away, because to me, how is it legal to withdraw things that children medically need? So now insurance companies are doctors without licenses. They're practicing
That's a good
medicine
way to put it. Yeah.
without having a license.
Wow.
So when did they become that, and how have they been allowed to do this? I remember, like, do I really want to take this on, like, emotionally, physically? Like, do I really want to go to battle? And I really thought hard about this, because who, if not me, then who? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of things, but I know so many different people within our state in so many different realms. How can I bring all these people together that say, we have to change this for kids here in our state? Nevada is really frowned upon when it comes to children, and the success that we're able to achieve with them. So why are we going to continue to dump into the bucket of negativity? These children need this, and you can't withdraw it, especially when an insurance policy has not changed. So in a very short period of time, I've learned a lot about insurance and how the insurance game works. And it's a game. And it's really, I have a lot of empathy for the parents, because it can almost be their full-time job to ensure that their child that has complex challenges gets everything that they need to support those challenges.
It is.
And I look at some of our families who spend, several hours a week just to ensure that the insurance doesn't deny what their children rightfully should receive. Mm-hmm. They don't do it with any other care. Why are they doing it now with children?
So they're these companies are basically saying, we know your child needs these services, but we don't care. Just sorry.
They're really brushing it off as like, well, the school should provide it. Well, the school should provide it. But the reality is that a lot of children with autism don't go to school. And they don't go to school because they have a school system that's not trusted. So if you have a non-speaking child, it's very difficult to send your child to a public school where you know nothing, and then you see lawsuit after lawsuit. You hear of lawsuit after lawsuit about how our children with complex disabilities are being mistreated.
And it makes it worse when the parents or guardians say, well, I don't want my child to go in this environment because they're autistic, and it's like, no, they need to be in an environment around other children their age.
Yes, right, so. Exactly. And that just isn't common. Okay. And so I felt like it was like, this is what this next stage for me is supposed to be about, is like, I do stand up for children. I'm part of an advocacy board in our state that does stand up for issues that relate to children, and then teaching other people to become advocates as well. Like, I feel like this is my mission. This is why I was put into this position, this board position, so that I can take this on and protect our children in Nevada. We've got about 18,000 children diagnosed with autism in our state.
Wow.
That's 18,000 children who have a complex need that needs to be met, that their medical insurance rightfully should pay for. But I think the insurance company realized that it's not a moneymaker. A child with autism, they're not going to make a lot of money because they do need to meet the need, and the need is high. And so they're allowed to then say, because you cost too much money, we're going to limit what you're allowed to bill for.
So students are property then, basically.
Children are now property. They're owned and manipulated, and their success truly relies on whether this can be covered or not. And it makes me very sad and actually a little bit angry to know that families who can't take time off work to fight this battle will not get to do that for their child. Yeah. So their child's going to lose. What happens in 10 years? What happens in 10 years when children begin to age into adulthood and they were not allowed to get any of these services? What's the strain going to be as an adult where children have not learned to regulate? They've not learned to advocate. They've not learned to develop agency. They haven't learned any of those skills because They were not allowed to go through the therapy. In 10 years, what is our prison system going to look like? What is our social services system going to look like? It's going to be taxed by the increased demand because we didn't meet it when they were children.
Mm-hmm.
And how they could look at that and say, like, oh, these are good decisions.
Yeah.
It seems like it breaks so many laws, not just on a state level, on a federal level, but also like, I believe it's the Children's Defense Fund sorry, not the Children's Defense Fund, not the World Health Organization. Maybe it is WHO that has like rights of children, and it's international rights of children. And one of those rights is that you get the things that you need to survive and be independent and grow. And it feels like, we're violating these rights of our children because they're young and they don't fight for themselves. They need somebody else to do that for them. And I think that there's a lot of people maybe doing it in a small pocket, but that's where in Nevada, I'd rather people jump out of that silo and bring this together on a large capacity to get really loud. And I think some of the best things that have happened have been grassroots, the education system turning it on its upside down on itself, because a lot of people started to see what the world was like because of that education. I think it can do the same thing. I look at the tobacco industry in the 80s of the same way. Like, they were too big to fail. Banking was too big to fail. Now we have this behemoth that's insurance companies. Are they too big to fail? I don't think so. I think that there needs to be that shift where we have to be the advocates for these children and not allow the insurance company to put that dollar before a child's, literally their entire future.
Yeah, I read the whole article front to back. And one of the things that stood out to me too, biggest things, is the governor. And, the governor is basically considered the boss of the state. So he doesn't have she doesn't have total control of decision making and stuff, but they advocate for health services, not necessarily insurance companies, but more of like the state funded ones, so like Medicaid, Medicare, but also too, they're supposed to open up forums for people to speak out, especially in situations like this. In the current governor is Lombardo, so it showed that he didn't even make a statement, and it's been since you heard the rumbling since the holiday season. How do you take that? Because the governor is supposed to. Where's the voice at? And
I think what I've learned a lot about politics in the last probably 10 years is that the people who speak out pretty quickly against something are not necessarily politicians. And so if you're not making a statement, that makes a statement. I think that I haven't played that card yet. In my file, I haven't played the card of like, at the state level, the governor really needs to be more in tune and aware of what's happening. I'm sure he's been briefed, but I don't know the length of it. I don't know what side. Is it the insurance company? And, is it their justification that's present? Or is it, the other side of a family? And sometimes it's not like until you're personally impacted that you understand the gravity of it.
Absolutely.
At least for me, like I was personally impacted because these learners I've had lost their trusted person. You're ripping them away with no separation, no transition. And what's that going to do to behavior for them? It's going to increase it because they didn't have that separation. So I think until those powerful people that make decisions are personally impacted, I don't know that they know. And so really looking at what's kind of transpiring right now is there's a lot of little grassroots meetings, but those need to just get really loud. We're heading into a legislative year this year. And so, in the spring, once they start pulling together, we need to get in front of as many people as possible to tell the story. And I think there's some ears that are willing to listen to that, but they need to rattle the cage at like that state level as the governor. These are, again, 18,000 children in the state of Nevada. He was the former sheriff in Clark County. Lots of police officers' families are impacted by autism. They've been impacted by this shift, even with private insurance. So what's going to happen then when it comes down to a Medicaid level? This is now this is a big federal issue.
Exactly.
So I think that people just need to be a little bit louder and start to rattle the cage. I think there's, social media can be really negative, but it can also be used positively to rally people and bring them together for something positive. So I think this really deserves our attention at the state level. I think there's little tiny steps now happening, and I hope we can rattle this big cage to come all together, to have some decision makers at the county level that are willing to listen, and then eventually at our state level. But yeah, I think not making a statement is also making a statement.
Absolutely, yeah. Speaking of like the therapy field, for this population, do you see that growing too, or have you seen personally, like with students that you've helped develop, at your school, have you seen it go up and down as far as just the good and like the pros and cons that come out of it? Because I know, like personally, just doing research on it, it just seems it's very stagnant. It like it's there. Like if you have the right people on your team for that specific child or family, everything is gonna go good. But that's that's rare. So, do you think there needs to be changes in the field of ABA or?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think there absolutely does. And I think there's a lot of, again, the best thing I think starts at very low level, people in the field saying there's got to be a different way. And you need to get those people asking questions together. And so I think that's what I've done over the last 5 years is I've almost collected these humans that really feel like this should be done a different way. So then let's show how this can be done a different way. Let's make this evidence-based. A lot of our philosophy is evidence-based. How do we bridge it into the world of ABA? Where again, we're more focused and centered on agency, not compliance. Agency is still a behavioral approach, giving children choices. It should still be part of that behavioral approach. And so what we know now about the brain and how the brain works and how the brain functions and the connection between the body and the brain, and especially in children with autism, I'm excited to see that research continue to grow and be accepted and celebrated, because now we know, neurocognitive movement is very important for children with autism. Should be actually a first line of defense. We're now seeing health and nutrition finally making a statement when it comes to children with autism. We share a common child, in my school, and to watch his growth really has quadrupled in the last several months because all of these things are intact. You've got a person who approaches him from a very human-centered space. You have his, his health and nutrition are on the rise. He's working out, so that neurocognitive movement, the weightlifting, is helping him to be centered in his body and understand where he is in time and space, and also to help regulate him. So now to watch him go in and just start having conversations when it all had to be contrived before is, I think it's powerful. And I think if other families can look at this and say, I want this, well, we know what works. It's not a pill. It's a lot of work. It has to include a multidisciplinary team.
So if you have a family right now that is dealing with one of their children or even adult, like older adult, is having this issue, like what's one thing that they shouldn't do, to dealing with someone in the autistic community as far as their care, like whatever therapy or services that they need?
I think it's individually based. It really depends on the child and where they're at. I would say like the biggest thing to do, and it would be beautiful if I could write this in the perfect story, to have this newer kind of individually led dignified ABA therapy combined with movement or occupational therapy. I think that's the powerhouse. I think that before you even work on education in the common sense of education, before you work on math or anything, bring these two things together. Once you do these two things and they begin to be balanced, then you can start to put that cognitive demand, more and more on them. Don't remove them from peers. Do not take them out of peer experiences, try to work through those hard things, learn how they need to regulate in their emotion, but don't take them out of that peer experience, because that is what they're seeking. They're still seeking peers. They're still seeking the support of people around their own age. So don't withdraw them from that. And then I think if you can do those two things, and those two things are manageable, they can be measured over time. And I hope that in the world of ABA, that movement becomes part of the practice.
Yeah.
We know too much about the brain and the body now to eliminate that as behavioral regulation tools. That is at the heart and center of movement activities. So if we're feeling overwhelmed, how do we get back into our body? How do we calm our body when it's on fire? And teaching them to do that for themselves is powerful.
Rather than from a script, which I see that a lot of, but it's the matter of doing something that's actually going to make a difference, like you said, rather than just conforming to what they tell you should do. And if you look at the statistics, does it really balance out in a good way? So I appreciate you sharing that with the viewers on what to do and what not to do, because there's people out there, they don't know what to do. They don't know what their first step is. And what would be the first step, actually, like your very first step?
I would say for a family that's just newly diagnosed, I think the first thing is to find a community, because you're going to get hit and it's going to be like 100 pounds just smacked you in the face, and you're not going to know what to do. And people are going to say you should do this, this, and this. But that's their experience. So find a community that you can go in and find that support. So if you're being diagnosed, whether it be at a psychology office or your pediatrician, and you're getting that diagnosis, reach out. And this is, again, where social media groups can be a really powerful tool. There's a lot of great social media groups within Southern Nevada for parents of children with autism. And so go there, start there, and just ask, what are my next steps? So finding that community, and then get that child into occupational therapy as soon as you can.
For sure.
Start that almost before you do anything. And then look at nutrition as the third thing.
And
Nutrition
if you could briefly share, what is occupational therapy?
So occupational therapy is anything, sometimes people get it confused with physical therapy. It is not the same thing. So anything you would need to do to function in life and a job is occupational therapy, from brushing your teeth to walking up and down stairs with alternating feet. It's to making sure, your reflexes are integrated so they're not still present from when you were a baby. That has a lot to do with children with autism and their amount of overwhelm and stuff. So, going and fixing those things at that developmental level so that you can be successful in making your own food and brushing your teeth and cleaning your house and becoming regulated, being able to read, all of those things come because occupational therapy was a really valued part of their beginning.
So what's next for you? Just being a director of a school, mom, educator, it seems like you don't ever get sleep.
I know. Some days it feels that way.
Yeah.
I'm trying to actually do better with that since I am getting older.
Okay.
But we're expanding out to be a ranch here in Las Vegas and have an extension campus out there, because I notice I'm getting a lot of boys who have ADHD when they're really just boys that need to move their body, and being outside is a great place for that.
Exactly.
So recognizing the demand and the trajectory of how that's changing. So we're expanding out to the ranch where we'll have ranch school. So it'll be Acton Academy, and everything we do, we will just have the outside be an active part of our learning as well. And continuing to do that. Eventually I want to get to the place where I can tell other people about this, where I can go and present at a conference, or I can present professional development to say, like, hey, just a minute, let's rethink how we're doing this, and let's try to shift this. My ultimate goal, what I really would love, is to have one class in one school in the public school system. Give me one class for 3 years, multi-age children, and watch how we can change. Let that be the experiment that we're allowed to run with autonomy.
Hmm.
I feel like it's a pipe dream, but that's my one goal.
Right.
At the end of this, before I hang up a hat and retire, I want us to be able to do this in one school.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to just have this honest exchange with me.
Absolutely.
I hope we can do this again.
Yeah.
We'll definitely be connecting, keeping in touch, and hopefully we can work on some things to address a lot, not only in the ABA field, but just the overall community in general. So
Absolutely.
thank you again.